So you heard that there was this program called Dreamweaver that did a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to writing XHTML, and you were correct. Now that you have formed good coding habits, it's time to introduce you to your XHTML writing staff, which is how I like to think of Dreamweaver. As a web page designer, you can never give up your responsibility for writing good XHTML and CSS code. However, Dreamweaver can help you tremendously by picking up the hard work of keeping track of what properties are available to you and providing you that information literally as you code your elements. In this lesson, we'll explore how to use Adobe Dreamweaver CS4 as an HTML editing tool. To get started with Dreamweaver, I'll double-click on the Dreamweaver icon on my desktop and observe the default panel configuration that Adobe has assembled for designers. You can change your panel configuration in Dreamweaver at any time, and there are several predefined panel configurations organized in such a way to help HTML coders who work in different capacities work as efficiently as possible. But before we dive into all of that, and before we start using Dreamweaver to edit our HTML, we need to set the preferences that we want Dreamweaver to adhere to before we get started. So, on the Macintosh, under the Dreamweaver menu, we'll select Preferences. On Windows, you'll find Preferences under the Edit menu. And when the Preferences dialog loads, you're presented on the left with a series of categories, and underneath each category, there are a series of options that you can configure. We'll work from the bottom up and start with the Validator category. I'm picking this because I want to be able to tell Dreamweaver how to evaluate my code. In an earlier lesson, we discussed validation, which otherwise explained means making sure that our HTML code correctly adheres to the syntax of HTML or XHTML, which is what we've been using for the last several lessons. So under the Validator category, I'm going to check the XHTML 1.0 transitional doc type. And that's all that I'll change underneath this category. Another item that I'm going to set in my preferences is my Preview in Browser option. When I look under this category, I can see all of the web browsers that Dreamweaver has detected on my machine. And I want to make sure that in my case on the Macintosh, that Firefox is selected as the primary browser. If you're on the PC, you might specify or see that Dreamweaver has already made the association to have Internet Explorer as the primary browser. In this case, I'm going to leave Firefox as the primary browser. I just wanted to make sure that Safari or Opera weren't selected. I'm also going to look underneath the New Document category because I want to set the file extension that I want to be automatically appended to new HTML files so that I don't have to type it every time. In this case, the default was set to .html. I'm just going to delete the L in .html so that the extension for new files will be .htm. I also want to specify the default document type definition, DTD, which we talked about a moment ago when we touched upon validation, and which we have had at the top of every new file that we've created during the last several lessons. I don't want to type in that document type definition every time I create a new file. I want Dreamweaver to do that for me, knowing that I need that in order to create valid code. So I will make sure that XHTML 1.0 transitional is selected, and I'll accept the remaining defaults on this category. Other options that are available to you, but that you don't need to configure at this time if you're using Dreamweaver for the first time, include your fonts category, where you can specify the size of text to be displayed in the code view. We've been using TextEdit on the Macintosh as our HTML editing tool, and by default the text is set to something quite small in TextEdit. Here in Dreamweaver, I'm going to bring up my font size to something that looks a bit bigger on this screen, so I'll leave that at 14 point. Something like 10 point might look appropriate on your screen. I'm going to leave mine set to 14 point. And to get started, we're not going to change any of the other categories. At this time, we're ready to get going with Dreamweaver.